Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. Welcome to this, the final meeting of the Built Heritage Subcommittee in this term of council, 2014 to 2018. We have a relatively short agenda today. We're going to start with declarations of interest, and just to note that both Member Smallwood and Councillor McKenney indicated that they were not able to attend today, so and Councillor Wilkinson is on her way. So confirmation of minutes from October 4th, 2018, are those carried? Great. So we'll start with our first substantive item, which is the proposed designation of Cobble Cottage at 420 Kenwood Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and we're going to ask staff to provide a short presentation. Thanks.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Built Heritage Subcommittee. This application is for the designation of Cobble Cottage at 420 Kenwood Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The property is located in Highland Park in Ottawa's West End. The property is situated at the southeast corner of Kenwood and Cole Avenues. For some context, you can see Byron Avenue at the north, the top of the screen, and Churchill Avenue at the far right. Cobble Cottage is a fieldstone, 1.5-story side gable structure with a gabled roof central dormer that is clad in stucco and half timbering. The building was constructed in the bungalow style in 1912 and demonstrates characteristics associated with that style, which was popular across North America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Bungalows varied in height from 1 to 1.5 stories and frequently exhibited aspects of the craftsman style, including fieldstone, tapered piers, front verandas, wide overhanging eaves, and the use of stucco and half timbering. In this photo, you can see the large veranda under the large eaves with tapered stone piers that wrap around the front and part of the side of the house. Typical of craftsman-influenced architecture is the half timbering and stucco found in the gable end, as visible from Kenwood Avenue. Also noteworthy are the 6/6 sash windows with segmentally arched stone voussoirs. The house at 420 Kenwood Avenue, built in 1912 for James Gillespie, is a rare example of a fieldstone bungalow in Ottawa. A civil engineer, Gillespie lived in the house with his family until the 1940s. He was known locally for his involvement with the establishment of the Highland Park Lawn Bowling Club, located just a few blocks away. Westboro was first settled around 1819 with the arrival of Thomas Birch from Ireland. Westboro, with its large houses on large lots, was incorporated as a police village in 1905 and was marketed as Ottawa's Westmount. With the extension of the Ottawa Electric Railway to the village of Westboro, the area was desirable for its beautiful homes and a rural pastoral aesthetic with an easy streetcar ride to the city. The property at 420 Kenwood was featured in one of the advertisements for homes in Highland Park, which you can see on the left. The property at the intersection of Kenwood and Cole is a landmark within the community, as it is distinctive in its rare bungalow-style design, its abundant use of fieldstone, and its generous setback with an expansive corner lot with large trees. The official plan states that individual buildings, structures, sites, and cultural heritage landscapes will be designated as properties of cultural heritage value under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The provincial policy statement also states that heritage resources and significant cultural heritage landscapes shall be conserved. Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act gives municipalities the ability to designate properties of cultural heritage value under Part 4 of the Act. In order to do so, they must meet Ontario Regulation 0906, which states that a property must meet at least one of the 3 criteria listed. These criteria relate to the property's design or physical value, its associative or historical value, or the property's contextual value, such as its role as a landmark or its contribution to the character of the surrounding community. Cobble Cottage has cultural heritage value for its design as a rare Ottawa example of a craftsman-style house, and for its association with the early development of Ottawa's West End and the Highland Park neighborhood. As mentioned, Cobble Cottage is a rare example of a bungalow-style house with craftsman influences. Some of the key exterior attributes include the fieldstone cladding, the side gabled roof featuring a dormer window, in the east and west facades, the 6/6 sash windows, the stucco and half timbering the gable ends, which is up here again, and the large veranda that wraps around the west and north facade. Cobble Cottage's contextual value lies in its association with the early development of Highland Park. The property is a landmark in the community because of its distinct architecture and its setting on a large corner lot distinguished by tall trees. As far as consultation goes, the Westboro Community Association initiated this designation and was notified of this report. The property owner is also aware of the designation. Heritage Ottawa was notified and is supportive. And finally, Councillor Leeper is also supportive of the designation. In conclusion, Cobble Cottage meets the criteria in Ontario Regulation 0906, and the Department recommends the issuance of a Notice of Intention to Designate under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, according to the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value attached as Document 5 in this report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. As staff noted, there is correspondence that was circulated from Heritage Ottawa. We don't have any speakers registered on this item, so the floor is open if members have any questions or comments to staff on this proposed designation. Councillor Leeper, any comments?
I do appreciate staff's support for this. This has been a request that has moved well from the Westboro Community Association and area residents. I think people are aware of the degree to which Westboro is very rapidly changing, and I think the preservation of this home, which is in good shape and is going to be there for years to come, is just again a nice touchstone to Westboro's history. So I hope that committee will support its designation.
Great, thanks. Mr. Vester?
Just a question, and it has to do with what prompted the proposed designation. And I guess the reason for that question is whether or not Highland Park and Westboro have been subject to or plan to be subject to a whole inventory and heritage register program, which of course would have revealed this building and possibly others as candidates for designation or heritage district designation. Could you speak a little bit about why this one now and what the status is of the inventory of the whole of Highland Park? Because I think that would be important for us to understand.
Mr. Chair, as Councillor Leeper indicated, the designation request did come from the Westboro Community Association, so they sprung on this request to us, I believe due to concern, as he mentioned, to rapid changes in the neighborhood, and the concern of what may happen with this property, as it is a great example of a bungalow style and it's rare. As far as the Heritage Inventory Project, they have surveyed this neighborhood. I'm not entirely sure where things lie for reporting goes. It will come up to committee at some point.
I can just add into that. Yeah, the entire city is almost done now from the inventory perspective. This neighborhood is definitely done. And our plan is to bring forward reports to Build Heritage, Planning Committee and Council Q2. Probably the end of Q2.
Just to follow up, out of curiosity, from the survey that was done in Highland Park, are there other buildings that were identified, as was this one, as being potential candidates for designation, or is there any follow-up steps towards the idea of a heritage district? Could you just talk a little bit about that, about forecasting there?
Well, the inventory itself, the register project is our big first push, and as you can imagine, we're going to have, you know, thousands of new properties to be identified through that register project coming up. The project itself doesn't go forward and say, this house shall be designated, but we certainly look at clusters that are occurring through that registry process that might naturally lead to possible studies for HCDs in different areas of the city. We haven't done all that analysis yet. We're being focused more on the individuals at this point.
Okay, if there are no other questions or comments, is the staff recommendation carried? Carried. Okay, great, thank you. And thank you for the presentation, and thank you, Councillor Leeper, for joining us on that item. So we're going to go next to, our next item is actually formatted as an information previously distributed. And so we need to bring it on to the main agenda, which we're going to do so by motion. The Vice Chair is going to put forward a motion just to allow us to hear from staff on this issue at this meeting. Mr. Vice Chair?
Yeah. Yes, I'm pleased to move that the Built Heritage Subcommittee approve the addition of this item for consideration by the committee at today's meeting.
Is that carried? Great. Okay, so this is an item that relates to the Centertown Heritage Study, and staff would like to give us an update on that work. So over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This presentation will be very brief. It's just to give you a little bit of information about a project that we're just getting going on, which is the Centertown Heritage Study. This project was initiated earlier this year in response to a work plan item that's been on the sort of books for several years. The Centertown CDP process recommended that we reassess the existing Centertown Heritage Conservation District and the Minto Park Heritage Conservation District in terms of the actual inventory of the buildings, the categorization of the buildings. And once we started to look at that, and since that time, we have undertaken the Heritage Inventory Project in this area. And once we started to look at all of this information together, we thought, well, perhaps we should expand the boundaries and have a comprehensive look at Centertown, not just the existing HCD, to ensure that we are properly identifying and protecting the cultural heritage resources in this neighborhood, as well as implementing a plan to manage change that, as you know, is rapidly occurring. So the map on the screen shows you the boundaries of the study area. So the red line are the boundaries, so it runs from Bronson to the Canal and roughly Gloucester to Catherine Street. And the black line that you see is the existing Centertown Heritage Conservation District, designated in 1997. The purple line is the existing Minto Park Heritage Conservation District, designated in 1988. Both of these areas had inventories completed at the time of their designation. Particularly for the Centertown HCD, the inventory has been somewhat difficult over the years in terms of the information it has provided us, as well as the categorization and evaluation of the buildings. The Minto Park HCD has not experienced a whole lot of change, is not really under a lot of pressure, but because it is located in this area, we are looking at it again. And then the yellow dots that you see on the map are properties outside of the HCDs, but within the study area boundary that have been identified through the Heritage Inventory Project for potential addition to the Heritage Register. So when I looked at this and had it mapped, I realized that there were some clusters that were showing up, as Dana had just alluded to in the last presentation. This is part of the analysis that we will do as the Heritage Inventory Project clues up. So you can see in the Golden Triangle area, so east of Elgin Street, you see quite a big cluster of buildings that have been identified for the register. And then also the area to the west of the Centertown HCD around Dundonald Park, you see there's a high concentration of buildings in that area that have been identified for a potential addition to the register. So that's just to give you the geography of the study. And just as I said, a little bit of background, initiated through direction from the CDP, the need for an updated HCD plan for Centertown. The existing HCD study and plan for Centertown is from 1997 and does not really contemplate the types of development that we're seeing in Centertown today. And there was a need to sort of bring both the HCD and other planning documents in line with one another so that we're all sort of talking the same language. The project objectives here are to identify and evaluate all heritage resources in the study area, develop post-2005 HCD plans for both Centertown and Minto Park, and then through this new inventory, determine whether or not additional HCDs or Part 4 designations are warranted outside of the existing designations. So just to give you a little timeline, so we started this project Q3, Q4 of this year. Project launch, background research, preliminary analysis. We are currently in the hiring process for a consultant to complete the inventory portion of the work. So there are about 2,200 buildings that have to be inventoried and evaluated. Obviously there is some baseline data for many of those buildings, but it will need to be updated with new photography, et cetera. We anticipate having a consultant hired by the end of the month. Q1, Q2 of next year will be the inventory portion for the existing Centertown HCD, as well as the drafting of a new HCD plan for Centertown. The HCD plan work will be done internally. Q2, Q3 is public consultation, remainder of the study area inventory, so everything else other than the existing Centertown HCD, as well as recommendations from the consultants for new designations, whether that's Part 4 or Part 5. Q3, Q4, draft HCD plans, if there are new HCDs identified, public consultation, report to council, and then Q1 of 2020, project wrap-up, appeals, bylaws, etc. So that's a very sort of high-level timeline. The committee will likely receive updates on this project as it proceeds, but our immediate next steps are to start doing some outreach to the Community Association, Heritage Ottawa. I met with some members of the Community Association this week. I'm meeting with Heritage Ottawa at the end of the month to give them an update on the project. Outreach to other stakeholders and establishing sort of a heritage working group to help guide the project as we proceed. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe I'll start. I have a question just looking at the timeline. Assuming that one possibility which this expanded study area opens up is that the boundaries of the Centertown Heritage Conservation District could be changed. We don't know yet. But if that's the case, then is there not a risk that drafting the HCD plan without knowing yet what's contained in the HCD is a little bit putting the cart before the horse? So if you're doing the draft HCD plan first and only then deciding in Q2, Q3 what the boundaries of that HCD are going to be, is there not a risk that the plan then is not addressing the boundaries of the HCD?
That's a very good question, and we have sort of thought of that. At this point, we are working on the assumption that we will not be changing the boundaries of the existing HCDs based on legal advice we've received that amending boundaries can open us up to an appeal. We have been in discussions with legal at this point to determine whether or not we will continue with that assumption. So if that is the case, then we are drafting an HCD plan for an existing HCD without a change in boundaries. If that changes, then the timeline obviously would be amended to account for that.
Okay, thank you. That being the case, then, if there is a recommendation that there ought to be a Part 5 consideration of other parts of the study area, what I think you're saying is if staff were to recommend that and if council were to go in that direction, that would have to be a different Heritage Conservation District?
That's correct, with its own plan under the Act. It may be a very similar plan, but it would be its own plan.
Okay. My second question is just in understanding the scope and the work of the consultant that you're planning to hire. I presume that the work that was done on the heritage inventory is a pretty good baseline, because we just hired a couple of staff who went around the whole city and took pictures, and so I'm just trying to understand. I presume that's a pretty good base, but there's additional work that needs to be done on top of that, or maybe you can just explain.
I think the number one goal for this study area is a consistent level of information. Right now we have a survey from '88, a survey from '97, and then the recent Heritage Inventory Project. And those are for all different areas. So every building doesn't have all three of those, it only has one of them. So it's establishing a baseline there. The Heritage Inventory Project information level is not quite enough.
if we were to look at establishing or to determine whether or not we should establish an HCD. So there is further information and analysis required. So the scope of the work for the consultant is to establish a framework for survey forms for all 2,200 buildings, take all of the existing information and input that, and then determine a consistent level of information and ensure that all properties have that consistent level of information. And then in addition to that, establish an evaluation framework and identify buildings that are contributing or not contributing to the character of the study area.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, no action required on our part. Thank you for the update. Much appreciated. Good luck with that project. So we're going to move on then to other business, and we have two oral staff updates, both on Somerset House and on McGee House. And we, again, are just going to ask the Vice Chair to put forward a motion on those two items. Mr. Vice Chair.
I'd be happy to do that. I'd like to move that the Built Heritage Subcommittee suspend the rules of procedure to receive oral updates from staff with respect to Somerset House and McGee House on Wellington Street, and to dispense with the requirement for staff to provide separate written reports on these updates.
Okay, is that carried? It's carried, wonderful. So maybe we'll start with Somerset House. Mr. Kerr.
Thank you, Chair. As I had informed committee when we met last month, there was two orders that were issued for Somerset House, and today I'm going to provide you an update on the status of those two orders. So, as you recall, order number one was to provide a structural report detailing the current state of the building and to undertake necessary winterproofing to ensure that the building does not deteriorate any further. This order had an appeal date of October 26th, with the work to be completed by December 7th. No appeal was received by the city, and we are hopeful that the owner will comply by December the 7th. If work is not completed by December the 7th, the city is currently mobilizing to undertake the work soon after that date to ensure that the work is done for this winter. As a reminder to committee, again, these costs for the work with appropriate fees are billed back to the owner for the work that we undertake. Order number two related to the restoration of heritage attributes. The appeal deadline was November 1st, and again, no appeal was received by the City of Ottawa. That work is to be completed by October 30th, 2019, and this extra time was given to give the owner the time to carefully undertake the work with the appropriate craftspeople. We're meeting with the owner and his agents on November 27th, and we will be discussing the status of both of these orders and hopefully determining with him that this work is being undertaken. And certainly, Chair, I can provide a further update to this committee when we meet again in the new year on the status of those discussions. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions on that item? I see none, so thank you. That's encouraging in some ways that there was no appeal on the initial order, so we can start seeing some work on the winterproofing over the next few weeks. Okay, next item then is McGee House. So back over to you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to give the committee a brief update on the status of McGee House, since it was approved by Council on October the 10th, the demolition, I should say, the applicant, the property owner, has written to the city to let us know that he no longer intends to demolish the building and that he wishes to shore the building and fix it. At this stage, the city is in consultation with the owner on plans to shore the building. He has submitted plans. The city is currently negotiating with him about those plans and has had them peer reviewed by our engineer. In addition to this, as you are all aware, I'm sure, John Cook has stated that winter is an issue for this building, or could be an issue for this building. So our colleagues in Building Code Services have re-engaged John Cook to assess the building again and determine whether or not there is an immediate public safety risk, and they will take appropriate action as that happens over the next week or so. And Richard Ash is here from Building Code Services if there's any other questions.
Just a point of clarification. So if the owner does not demolish by the deadline tomorrow, then the city, before demolishing it, will do a subsequent report on the status of the building, and that's with what objective in mind?
So the deadline actually for the heritage permit was today, or is today, but the owner has since basically retracted his application for a heritage permit, so that deadline is sort of moot at this point. So at this point, our building code colleagues are working with the information that John Cook has provided us and getting him to follow up again to sort of reassess the building, because that information was provided to us in July about timelines and winter and that sort of thing. So assessing the stability of the building again to determine whether or not it poses a public safety risk. And Richard, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, just basically what Leslie had said is that we'll be guided by our professional expert, and we'll be taking appropriate action based on a lens of public safety. So once the recommendation comes in, we're in close contact with John Cook's office, and he'll be doing a review within the next 72 hours, 72 hours, and we should have a better plan moving forward based on his recommendations.
So if the subsequent review determines that there is not a public safety risk, then what would be the steps? So John Cook goes back and says, no, I was wrong. There's enough stability in this building. It doesn't pose a public safety risk. What would be the steps that the city would take in that scenario?
I think that based on what John Cook's initial review of the building was, it's not a matter of if, it's when. So, I mean, he's saying that winter is going to be detrimental to the structural stability of this building, and it's just a matter of when the city, and when his recommendation would be that the building poses a risk to failure.
So what your point is, it's an issue of timing as opposed to an issue of what the outcome will be?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions? Councillor Lieber.
Thanks, and I do appreciate the update from staff. I'm receiving a significant volume of email and texts and social media discussion around the building continuing to stand where it is. I've heard from merchants who have asserted, and I believe them, that they are seeing reduced walk-in traffic as a result of the sidewalk being closed. We know that having the sidewalk closed means that people are jaywalking and crossing the street inappropriately. Merchants are worried about the Christmas season coming up and lost business. Every 24-hour period at this point matters. It is important to the residents of Hintonburg and the merchants of Wellington West that the building come down as quickly as possible. I am wondering, we have that opinion from John Cook from the summer that says the building is not going to be able to withstand the winter. Can we not rely on that to move forward?
So thank you. At this time, like Leslie had said, the report was written back in July, and it was left obviously open in the sense that they made the statement that the onset of winter would be the issue, and that it takes another review, more in-depth review at this time of the building, which is going to happen in the next couple of days. And we'll know more at that time, but we can't go on there was no definitive answer from Mr. Cook at that time, other than the fact that the building was structurally needing repair, and that winter was going to adversely affect it, and so that it's now the appropriate time to reassess that and see if we get further guidance.
Okay, and I do share your confidence. I hope that reassessment is going to demonstrate that the building can't take a snow load, and that the freeze-thaw, the continued water going into the walls and expanding, contracting is not good news for that building. And the last thing we want, obviously, is an uncontrolled collapse at that site. But we also want the sidewalk open, and we want to restore pedestrian connectivity through there. Just to make sure that everyone is clear on what the process is here, this is not a decision that City Council is going to make when we talk about the city. I think it is the Chief Building Officer who is going to make that determination. And can you clarify under what statutory powers that decision will be made?
Mr. Chair, it's Stuart Huxley from Legal Services. In response to the question, the member is correct. This matter is being addressed under the Building Code Act and the delegated duties and powers to the Chief Building Official. And so the Chief Building Official is monitoring the situation closely and will be using the powers and duties in order to protect public safety under that piece of legislation.
And the Chief Building Officer's power is to order a demolition is limited to a public safety emergency, if I understand correctly?
That's correct. Under the Act, there are provisions to deal with public safety as provided for under the various provisions to protect the safety of, obviously, individuals and to protect the safety of adjacent properties, etc.
Okay. Thank you very much. Again, please do make sure that we're pursuing those engineering avenues and legal avenues on a minute-by-minute basis, because it is becoming a significant detriment to our community.
Okay, thank you. Question from Councillor Moffat.
Just curious, what's the best case scenario for when this building comes down?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear.
What's the best case scenario for when this building comes down? I'm just curious how much benefit of the doubt the owner gets. He deserves none, but just curious.
Well, I mean, like I said, concurrently, we're also in discussion with the owner. The owner's put forward with his professional consultants a report to stabilize the building, and our engineer has reviewed that. And there are some issues there where we're back and forth with him, and he has a right to. It is private property; it's his building, and he has the right to take that avenue, but at some point in time, like I say, these all kind of converge, all these issues converge, and the Chief Building Official has to make the call through his, through our consultant, that it's the right time that the building has to come down if there's been no viable plan to remediate it.
So when's the earliest you would expect that decision to be made?
It's hard to say until we have the report from Mr. Cook. That's going to come in the next few days, so I'd have more to say on exactly, and it's not going to happen within the next few days, but it could happen depending on what comes out of that report. It could happen shortly. So will the owner have a chance to refute that report? The owner can appeal an order. We would write an order if, based on Mr. Cook's report, if the recommendation was that the building needed to be further demolished, we would issue an emergency order to that effect through the Building Code Act, and the owner would then have the ability to appeal that. To who? To the court. And but we would act concurrently regardless. It's whether the judge would stay something.
Councillor Leeper.
Just to follow up on Councillor Moffat's line of questioning, I appreciate the difficulty in trying to put a date on this, but I do appreciate hearing that this could happen soon, and that's my understanding as well. Do we have a demolition crew that is ready to move in when we have that order issued? Are we looking at any time delay in trying to get the work contracted?
We don't have somebody lined up at this present time. Mr. Cook has a company that we used the first time around that would be engaged should that decision be made.
So how long could it take, if an order is issued, to get a contractor on site?
I would say it's short order. I can't comment on an exact, whether it's days, hours, that sort of thing. I don't have that type of information.
Okay. Okay, any other questions on this issue? Okay, seeing none, thank you for the update. And that concludes the agenda in terms of items on this list. So since it is indeed our last meeting in this term of council, before we adjourn, I wanted on behalf of the committee to thank Eric, our diligent clerk, and the whole team from the clerk's office, Christine, Melody, Lucy. Thank you for all of your help over the last 4 years, much appreciated. And to Court and Dana and your team, all the members of the Heritage staff, thank you for all of the hard work that you've done over the 4 years. And thank you to members. I think it's been an important 4 years, the first time that this committee has been in operation for the full term. We had 2 years before. And we're going to adjourn the meeting now, but for those who are interested, we're going to follow the formal meeting with an informal discussion, because I thought it was useful to hear views on how the work of this committee can improve and what kind of recommendations or thoughts or ideas we would have to the next committee that will be struck probably in January 2019 in terms of how they ought to conduct their business. So I think it would be helpful to reflect a little bit on that. So we'll do that in a matter of seconds, but we will now formally adjourn this portion of the meeting. So we are adjourned. Everyone is welcome to leave or stay as you wish. This is a public, informal reflection opportunity. And members will see that I circulated